Good morning. Mr. Rajaratnam, our colleagues, the resource persons from Austrac, Mr. Amaratunga and the Central Bank team from the FIU and the Center for Banking Studies, Mrs. Gunaratna, and the compliance officers from the financial institutions. Let me first thank you all very much for taking the trouble to join us today. And the first key message that I would like to deliver, both as the governor of the central bank, as well as the chairperson of the National Coordinating Committee, is that we take this issue extremely seriously. And of course, as Mr. Amaratunga has shared with you, and I'm sure you're all aware, this is an area we need to up our game. Our current position is not satisfactory. There is a possibility that we could slip down with some serious negative consequences. So we need to take stock, and the FIU, I know, is making every effort to reverse the situation and to get us back to where we need to be. And of course, we can't do this without your help. So it's critical that we all work together, because the consequences of allowing the situation to deteriorate are serious indeed. So that's really the main message I'd like to give to all of you. I understand this is the second symposium on anti-money laundering and countering of the financing of terrorism organized by the FIU of Sri Lanka. And we are indeed grateful to Mrs. Gunaratna and the Association of Compliance Officers of Licensed Banks who have extended their support in organizing this event. My understanding is that there will be 3 themes discussed during the course of today. One is the risk-based approach in terms of FATF guidelines, and that session will be led by our colleagues from Australia, from Austrac. The second session is on money laundering typologies, and there the Sri Lanka Police and Sri Lanka Customs will help us to deliver that session. And finally, there is a session on investigation and prosecution of financial crimes, where our senior colleague from the Attorney General's Department will assist us. Now, as you all know, Sri Lanka is a member of the APG, and clearly we are bound to follow or to uphold the standards set out by the FATF, which is the global norm setter, the standard setter in this area. Now, in 2014-15, the APG conducted an evaluation on Sri Lanka and identified a number of areas where we need improvement. And these areas include, we need to undertake some amendments to our legislation. We need to adopt a national AMFL CFT policy. We need to improve technical expertise in money laundering and terrorism financing investigation and prosecution. We need to extend the AML CFT coverage to accountants, lawyers, real estate agents, and dealers in precious metals, etc. We need new CDD rules on financial and non-financial institutions, and we also need to introduce a risk-based approach. We need you really to adopt a risk-based approach to this issue. And today's workshop will have a focus on the application of a risk-based approach by financial institutions. In a nutshell, a risk-based approach requires countries, competent authorities, and banks to identify and assess and understand the money laundering and terrorism financing risks to which they are exposed, and take the appropriate mitigation measures in accordance with the level of risk. Now, let me now turn to saying something about the importance of complying with the AML CFT standards. In a broader perspective, financial institutions are expected to adhere to 1. legislation, rules, standards issued by the legislators and the supervisors. 2, market conventions, codes of practice, which are promoted by industry associations, also have an important role to play in achieving the necessary standards. And finally, the internal codes of conduct applicable to staff members of different institutions. All these 3 elements are important in creating the right overall environment for us to address these important issues effectively. Now, why do we need to comply with AMFL-CFT? It's necessary to do so, 1, to protect the integrity and stability of the financial system, 2, to cut off the resources available to terrorists, and 3, to make it more difficult for those engaged in crimes to launder their ill-gotten gains. Now, of course, those involved in money laundering are constantly evolving new ways of undertaking their practices. This requires great vigilance. And in many ways, those of you who are compliance officers in financial institutions are very much on the front line in terms of this battle to keep up with the money laundering, those who are involved in money laundering. They are constantly developing new areas, and there are systemic changes that are taking place all the time. So, in a sense, we need to work with you to make sure that you are up to speed in terms of combating this menace, which has a number of negative effects which percolate right through the system. So compliance is necessary in order to prevent financial institutions being abused by money launderers, terrorist financiers, and drug traffickers, etc. We need to achieve international best practice to combat these issues effectively. Now let me turn to some of the consequences of non-compliance by a country. First, the APG-FATF will issue public statements regarding the non-compliance of the country. That will result, or is likely to result, in foreign financial institutions limiting their operations with Sri Lanka. Another consequence is that correspondent banking and terminate lending relationships will be adversely affected. And finally, investor confidence in the country will deteriorate, and the sovereign rating can be adversely affected. So there's a systemic kind of impact which can go right through the financial system, where all your institutions can be affected. So in a sense, it's important that we have a concerted and cooperative approach to this problem, because, as you know, these operators in the area of money laundering pick the weakest link in the system. So if there are 1 or 2 institutions which are weak, they can come in through that weak link, and in the end, there can be a contagion effect which affects the whole financial system. So it's very important that all of us work together, that the compliance officers who are very much on the front line are alive to the importance of this issue and are constantly keeping in touch with the latest thinking. And there, the FIU has a responsibility, and I know my colleagues are keen to work with you to make sure that you are up to speed in terms of how to address these issues. So as I said, what happens is that if you get this, if money laundering becomes a major issue, it can affect the whole system, and even legitimate businesses end up having restricted access to trade and financial markets. Banks, finance companies, insurance companies, stockbrokers will all have their reputations, their operations, and their compliance standards compromised when there is no anti-money laundering system which is sound. And of course, this then gets translated into loss of profits, liquidity issues, asset seizures, and a decline in the stock value of the companies. So what are some of the challenges in today's context in relation to AMFL CFT compliance? Now, the IMF estimates that a total of $1.5 trillion of money is laundered illegally worldwide every day. Is that right? It's an everyday number, 1.5 trillion? Annually. It's 1 billion a day, is that right? And 1.5 annually. Now, of course, globalization, which has benefits, and has had benefits, and has helped to drag millions of people out of poverty, particularly in Asia, does have its downside as well. And one of the downsides is that it has created new opportunities for criminals to carry out money laundering activities. In particular, the electronic payment systems have given enormous opportunities for criminals. The rise of virtual currencies, mobile banking, and cyber trade have increased the options open for money laundering activity. So the globalization of financial services and the advancement in technology have consequently posed challenges to regulators and law enforcement agencies, as criminals have become more sophisticated in utilizing reporting institutions to launder illicit funds and use them as conduits for money laundering and terrorism financing activities. Now, let me move across to the way forward and the meeting of the challenges. Now, in Sri Lanka, the economy at an inflection point. We have a good opportunity to take the economy to a higher level of, a higher trajectory of growth and development. The jury is still out whether we have done enough, whether we are doing enough, whether we are getting our act together sufficiently to achieve that higher level of trajectory in terms of growth and development, but there's a real possibility that we will do so. There's every opportunity for various reasons. I'm not going to go into those in this forum, but what it does mean is that you're going to see a higher level of economic activity. The economy is going to be more and more integrated with the global economy. You're going to see a greater volume of financial flows, whether it is in the form of FDI, whether it is in the form of tourism financing, whether it is in the form of other types of credit financing. So there's going to be much more money swirling around in the system across the border. And this, of course, clearly then also creates risks. It creates opportunities for those who wish to perpetrate illegal actions. So that as the economy develops, as it becomes more open, as it becomes more integrated with the global economy, clearly the challenges in terms of combating money laundering and terrorism financing also become more complex. So we need to be ready to face that challenge. And my colleagues, I know, are working very hard to make sure that they are able to assist you to meet this challenge. Now, I'm happy to state that the FIU, with its partners, has already taken a number of steps. One, they are seeking to bridge various AMFL CFT gaps with the approval of the Cabinet of Ministers. Two, they're reviewing and amending the relevant legislation. Three, MOUs are being signed with domestic and foreign entities to strengthen domestic and international cooperation. And there are various efforts to build capacity amongst the regulators, compliance officers, and other stakeholders. And in this context, it becomes more and more important for financial institutions to adopt a risk-based approach in their day-to-day operations. They need to conduct their KYC operations properly, and whenever necessary, banks and finance companies should get additional identification, information, perform additional searches, commission an intelligence report on the customer or beneficial owner, and verify sources of funds. As I said, the challenge is going to become more complex. The volume of financial flows are going to get greater. All this is going to place an even higher premium on all the stakeholders in this area cooperating and working together to build up our defenses against these activities, which can corrode the whole financial system if they are left unchecked. Finally, we also think it's important that staff at all levels, you're the compliance officers, clearly you have a leadership role to play in this area, but it's important that staff at all levels in your institutions are aware of the challenges that anti-money laundering and terrorism financing pose and the kind of standards that one needs to aspire to or to achieve, really. It's not enough to aspire, we need to achieve those standards. We also consider it our role to equip you with the knowledge in tackling the above, and in that context, this symposium will, we hope, be very useful for you. I understand there are about 150 participants representing licensed banks and licensed finance companies present here. I thank you all very much for taking the time to come and attend this important symposium. I also thank our resource persons who have come from Australia, to Mr. Rajaratnam from the AG's department, to our colleagues from the police and customs who have given up their time to come and to assist you in building up your capacity in addressing the important issues in this area. So with that, let me wish all of you very productive and fruitful deliberations during the course of the day, and also reiterate my thanks for coming here to participate in this cooperative endeavor, which needs to get stronger and stronger to meet the threats that we are likely to face. Thank you.